Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Tax, the show for growth-minded CPAs and real estate professionals in tax. I'm Dave McGuire. In today's episode, we're going to talk about software for cost segregation. Joining us today is Austin Brown. Austin's one of the leaders in our cost segregation practice out of our Dallas office. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you, Dave. Pleasure to be here.
So, Austin, you've been working for us for quite a while now. So, when did you start? And if I remember correctly, you didn't start in cost segregation, did you?
I started in 2018 as an R&D consultant for McGuire Sponsel.
But then you quickly moved over, joined our review team, and did some other things on the cost seg side where you got a little bit more involved and learned some of the technical aspects. Now, I know you started here in Indy. How did you end up in Dallas? I know you work in Dallas now. How did that transition move?
Yeah, the first 5 years here in Indianapolis were fantastic. I got to touch on so many different areas of the practice and really grow and develop. In congruence, the firm was really growing and developing at the same time and looking to push our geographic limits of our offices. I was approached with the opportunity to help open up the Dallas office and move down there with two other people from Indianapolis. And for 3 years now, we've been growing and trying to make a name for ourselves in the Dallas market, and it's been a great experience.
Well, I appreciate you kind of going the incongruence. So I think that's a word I wouldn't have used, but I do appreciate it because it really means growing together. And part of what I actually am interested in is, as you've seen the cost seg practice at McGuire Sponsel grow, it's grown with you as part of it. So can you give me an idea as how much have you seen the practice grow? Not actual numbers, but is it 50% bigger than when you started? Is it 25%? What do you think just offhand?
I would say 100% bigger than when I started.
Well, and so the reason I point that out
Yeah.
is as we get into some of the rest of the topics, the growth of the firm has been widely because of people like you and the firm and why the knowledge base that you have as it comes in. So bringing in that knowledge base, one of the things I want to talk about is, as we talk about cost segregation, how much of that knowledge base is important? And that's going to bring up the question of how much can it be replicated through software and automation versus how much of it do we actually have to have as still humans as that software and automation catches up. So Austin, in the last few years, we've been hearing more and more about software for cost segregation and other things. Now, the question I have for you is, when we're going through a typical day as it relates to cost segregation, how much of the portion of the practice does that actually involve? Is that the entire thing, or is that just part of the calculations? What, in your mind, what would that actually help with if that was well developed?
I could see it impacting a few different areas, Dave. One of the areas we've looked into already is the blueprint analysis and looking at the different mechanical, electrical, and plumbing schematics for the building. That is more on the calculation side. And we've seen that there are some softwares out there attempting to do a lot of the takeoffs, as we call them, trying to count all the counts of the different assets that we may be looking for in the blueprints. Right now, that's the most prominent area. We've also seen it potentially used for some actual reclassification of assets, but that, I would say, is very early and still on the forefront in that area.
Now, when you're actually sitting down and you're doing a cost seg study, obviously, walk me through the process. So we get a client, they sign up.
Mm-hmm.
What are the next steps and in terms of the time that's put into it? So how does that process look?
Yeah, I would break it down into basically three different steps of our process. We have the proposal, the site visit, and then the calculations. As you kind of mentioned, the proposal is pretty quick. We get a few different pieces of information from the CPA or client, and we're able to give them a high-level overview of what a cost segregation study's effects would be on the property. The site visit itself, usually, one or 2 day trip to wherever the property may be, typically taking up less than, I'd say, a third of the total project's engagement, or that part, the engagement of the project. And then the calculations, which typically take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks on their own. As we are a big practice and we have a lot of projects moving through, we have a typical turnaround time of completing a project from 4 to 6 weeks from the site visit date. But I would say it's actually a week to 2 weeks in the actual calculations of themselves. So definitely the bulk of the project.
So as we start talking about automating things, When you're saying the calculations, that includes the takeoffs and the estimation, or is that just the inputting the different assets into Excel?
Yeah, I would say the calculation is multifaceted and can vary widely depending on what type of project it is. When you think about a acquisition, it's mainly takeoffs, input, and making sure you're accounting everything from the building using your appropriate cost estimators. On the new construction side, it can look a lot different just based on the data that is provided to you from the client. Whether you're working with invoices, construction pay applications, general ledgers, sometimes it could be multiple pay applications and getting all those to talk to each other in the right way in the calculations. But yeah, from the new construction side, it can vary a lot wider and it's a lot less straightforward of a process.
So as somebody's going through that process, how much input is needed by the professional to understand the differences between assets? So, for example, as you're going through, let's say you're looking at an electrical system, and we know that the electrical system costs X, and you're trying to determine if an outlet is related to real property or personal property. Is that something that software has the capability of doing, or is that something that the professional really needs to step in and understand some of the case law behind it?
It definitely requires a professional at this state and time. As you mentioned, the case law, it can be, there's a very fine line sometimes between what can qualify as personal property or for short-lived tax and what cannot. And it is, sometimes the blueprints don't tell the whole story. They may all say, for example, in office such as our space, everything may be labeled office outlet. And so a software may simply think, okay, any receptacle dedicated to office equipment should be personal property and put into a shorter life. However, when you walk through the building, you can certainly see that that's not the case, and that there are tons of blank, spare, as we'll call them, general receptacles that are not directly dedicated to any piece of specific equipment. Had a software not been able to pick this up or not make the determination between something that's actually in use and something that's just a general use, you could be looking at a way overstated reclass of assets into personal property, and it can turn out to be aggressive for the worse.
So you mentioned earlier that there are software packages that have been adopted by the cost seg industry to make certain parts of the process more accurate. Do we use any of those in the day-to-day of the practice?
Yes, with all of our new construction projects, we utilize PlanSwift. It is a software that enables you to upload paper or electronic blueprints into its system. It allows you to scale those blueprints so that you can easily measure different size prints and still come to accurate conclusions. It also is more of just a management tool from a blueprint analysis perspective. It's one location that keeps all of your, for example, counts. We were just talking about outlets. You can upload all the electrical prints and simply make counts. So in that sense, like I mentioned, PlanSwift is a blueprint management tool, and it allows you to efficiently and accurately pull the data you need from it. However, it isn't doing anything from an automated perspective, which when we did look at some potential automated blueprint software products, it still required the same amount of review and confirmation of the automated counts that we were getting at when using our own just blueprint managing software.
So that's the PlanSwift you mentioned.
Yes.
That's not designed specifically for cost seg. That's more of a construction software that's been developed over the years that we're adopting to use within our practice.
Yes, construction, architectural, really anyone who's accessing these kind of blueprints, they can use it to help effectively manage and make different measurements and calculations from those blueprints.
So once you've done that estimate, obviously you've now got to, so we've decided, you've made an estimate and you've actually calculated how many linear feet of wire, for example, we keep going back to the electrical, but how many square feet of carpet there is.
Sure.
How many square feet of vinyl tile there are, how many square feet of wood flooring there are. That then goes into a set of schedules, correct?
Correct.
And that's the part where a custom cost seg practice might have a custom cost seg software. But that's only a small portion of what I would assume you're doing on a day-to-day basis, correct?
Yes, it's only a very small portion.
Now, once you do that, how do you make the decision as to whether or not to click that personal property button or what life to put next to it? Is that something that the software can do? Or are there questions, or is there a decision tree that you have to go down that could get complicated at times?
Yeah, there's certainly a decision tree. Some of you may be familiar with what's called the white cofactors and the inherently permanent test, looking at the different factors necessary to determine if something's personal property or not. The software does not do that. In addition to the personal property test, there's also a large list of different asset classes that may or may not fit a different company's business use. So on top of just saying whether or not something is personal property or not, there's the added layer of making sure we're correctly identifying the proper asset class itself. So it goes a step further just from personal or not. It goes to, are you even using the right personal kind of property?
So it's almost like I can buy TurboTax and put it in, but as things get more complicated, that's where kind of the devil's in the details.
Certainly.
Now, obviously, you've been doing this. How long have you been doing the cost seg work for?
We're going on 8 years.
So you've been working on this for 8 years.
Yeah.
Are there still things that come up that are a little bit different? Or is there a more nuanced situation that maybe you ran into during tax season this year?
Yes, there was. Speaking of those different specialty asset classes and getting into the nitty-gritty of the different definitions and making sure something truly does qualify for the proper personal property asset class, we had a client this past tax season who is in the business of selling grain, feed grain to be exact. And from their quick analysis of the different asset classes and some of the tax codes, they thought that the entire structure of some of their different warehouses should qualify as personal property because it was solely used to store grain. And on a surface level reading of the single purpose agricultural or horticultural asset, you might get that conclusion that, okay, I'm storing a certain grain or a certain product. Let's take the entire structure as 10-year property and bonus eligible. However, there's another caveat to both of those scenarios in that grain needs to be stored for the sole production of agriculture or for the sole raising of livestock. And that simply was not the case with this client. They were storing grain to sell it. So those little, I guess, minute or fine details in an asset class's description can have great impact, whether it's accelerating depreciation, taking it the right way, or accidentally taking improper accelerated depreciation benefits like we prevented this client from doing. Those fine details are something that always pop up in tax season and can always provide clarity to our clients.
Now, another one that I think comes up, and we've talked about this in recent years and on recent podcasts, the difference between 27.5 and 39-year assets. Do you ever see that people are misclassifying things either as 27.5 or as 39 in the inappropriate bucket? And how do you make that determination?
All the time. The rise of Airbnbs and Verbos has made this even more present than it was prior to that market emerging. The way to determine if something is either long-term, 27.5 year, or short-term, 39, is to look at the average stay of the tenant at the property. Typically, we will say if it is anything over 30 days at a time, then you're considered a long-term tenant, and that should be treated as a 27.5 year property. And if the average stay of your renter is less than 30 days, we consider that more of a transient basis, similar to a hotel. And those kind of properties would stay in a 39-year tax life.
Now, does that have a ripple effect through other types of assets? So if you say, hey, something's 27.5 or something's 39, does that affect other things? Let's say somebody's renovating a rental home. Does that affect anything else going down?
It certainly does. Qualified improvement property is an asset class that carries with it a 15-year life, and it covers with it all interior, non-structural improvements made to non-residential properties. If you simply read non-residential, you may think, okay, anything residential is off limits. We can't touch it all. Nothing's getting QIP. However, it strictly applies to a 27.5 year asset class. So anything with a 27.5 year asset class is not eligible for qualified improvement property. And thus, any interior improvements you make, like doors, water heaters, restroom fixtures, all of that's going to stay in the longer lived 27.5 year asset class. But if you have a long-term property, 39 year, you are able to take advantage of that qualified improvement property and you are able to reclassify those kinds of assets into 15-year bonus eligible life.
So if I'm looking at a house, knowing the difference between whether or not I'm treating it as long-term versus short-term, if I go to renovate it, you're saying if I have a long-term, I can potentially take bonus depreciation through that QIP, or sorry, let me rephrase that. If I have a short-term house, so if I'm doing a VRBO,
Yes.
I can potentially take a large portion of my renovation as a QIP, and I don't have to depreciate it over the same life of that investment. So when we're seeing things like that, that's where I think the question marks come up with when somebody says, hey, here's a cost seg software, is those are the things that are in your head, which I don't sure that how we get those things out onto a piece of paper and just go, we're going to automate this portion of it, at least not in the short term. In the long term, I'm sure automation will come into play. With that said, how much within the McGuire Sponsel practice are you guys looking at other ways to automate, AI, other things to see where we can bring savings to our clients by lessening the amount of work that's involved?
Yeah, we've particularly looked at it from the blueprint analysis point of view. As I spoke to earlier, we've tested out some different softwares just to help with that initial data collection from blueprints. By no means is it exhaustive. It still requires quite a bit of manual review upon completion, and it is not something that is viable yet. However, it's something we're going to keep our finger on and try to stay in tune with. It is an area that could provide efficiencies that would enable us to, complete a study quicker.
Now, once you get that information, you pointed out something probably pretty critical. You said that you have to still review it. As some of these softwares become more and more integrated and people are looking for something that can do everything, would you feel comfortable if you can't get into the nuts and bolts, if you can't review how the calculation's going in behind the scenes, or would that be something you would go, wait a second, I can't sign my name to something if I'm not the one reviewing the actual work that goes into it and the calculations behind the scenes?
Yeah, I would feel the latter, especially as a firm who prides ourselves on audit protection and putting up a quality cost segregation study, something that we feel is defendable by the IRS. I would like either myself or one of our team members to definitely have eyes on that project before it went just from some sort of software with final results to a client.
Well, I think we've pointed out a couple things today. I think one of the key things is, yes, the softwares are being developed out there, but the key components of where the volume of the work that it sounds like you guys are doing are involved in the site visit and the takeoffs and other things, which aren't really answered by some of the cost segregation software packages. They're really answered by some of the other packages that are out there. What you seem to be telling me is that some of these software packages that are being marketed to cost segregation individuals, what they're trying to do is supplement the knowledge base, but that's where the kind of the devil's in the details. That's where you can mess up, as you said, not knowing correctly which outlet, how to catalog them, or where some of the potential issues are as you trip it up. So with that, I think it leaves a lot of fuel for thought for some of the people that are listening. But as there's questions that come up, with it being something that we're still working on, I'm assuming you're more than happy to answer questions as people come along and say, hey, what do you think about this package? What do you think about this as it goes forward? Well, thank you for joining us today, Austin. Hopefully people learned something by listening, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to us today.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking time to tune in today. You can subscribe to the Let's Talk Tax podcast on YouTube and follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. In addition, today's show notes and links to more about this episode can be found online at mcguiresponsel.com/Let's Talk Tax podcast. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.